Kamakoti is the Akashvani of the group. So he hardly shows up his
Want me
face.
to read it?
Akashvani, that's a good one.
He wants to be Nirakar, not Sakar.
That's a good one, Mamaji.
Good morning, Avatar Meher Baba ki Jai. Am I able to share my browser with
Yes, yes.
Baba's?
Yes.
Okay.
Jai Baba.
So may I request Ravi to read the 7 realities if you're able to see the screen? Ravi?
Yes,
Great. 7 realities. Go right ahead.
7 realities: existence, love, sacrifice,
Sorry.
renunciation, knowledge, control, and surrender. I give no importance to creed, dogma, caste, or the performance of religious ceremonies and rites, but to the understanding of the following 7 realities. 1. The only real existence is that of the one and only God, who is the self in every finite self. Number 2. The only real love is the love for this infinity, God, which arouses an intense longing to see, know, and become one with its truth, God. 3. The only real sacrifice is that in which the pursuance of this love, all things, body, mind, position, welfare, and even life itself are sacrificed. The only real renunciation is that which abandons, even in the midst of worldly duties, all selfish thoughts and desires. Number 5, the only real knowledge is the knowledge that God is the inner dweller in good people and in so called bad, in saint and in so called sinner. This knowledge requires you to help all equally as circumstances demand without expectation of reward. When compelled to take part in a dispute, to act without the slightest trace of enmity or hatred, to try to make others happy with brotherly or sisterly feeling for each one, and to harm no one in thought, word, or deed, not even those who harm you. 6. The only real control is the discipline of the senses to abstain from indulgence in low desires, which alone ensures absolute purity of character. Number 7. The only real surrender is that in which poise is undisturbed by any adverse circumstance, and the individual, amidst every kind of hardship, is resigned with perfect calm to the will of God. Avatar Meher Baba ki Jai.
Jai Baba. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Thank you very much. We are on the types of meditation. Physical book, page number 219. Soft copy is 240. We are continuing from where we left off yesterday, which we completed part 3 of 7 or 8 chapters. I think it's 8 chapters, correct. So we finished part 3 of 8 and we are starting part 4, assimilation of the divine truths. Section A, modes of general meditation. The beginnings of spiritual life are marked and helped by general meditation, which is not concerned exclusively with selected specific items of experience, but which, in its comprehensive scope, seeks to understand and assimilate the divine truths of life and the universe. The subtitle is Limits of Philosophical Thinking. When the aspirant is interested in the wider problems of the ultimate nature of life and the universe and begins to think about them, he may be said to have launched himself upon such meditation. Much of what is included in philosophy is a result of trying to develop an intellectual grasp of the ultimate nature of life and the universe. The purely intellectual grasp of divine truths remains feeble, incomplete, and indecisive owing to the limitations of the experience that may be available as the foundation of the structures of speculation. The philosophical meditation that consists in free and unaided thinking does not lead to conclusive results. It often leads to diverse, conflicting systems of views. Nevertheless, philosophical thinking is not without value. Besides leading the aspirant a certain extent into the realm of knowledge, it provides an intellectual discipline that enables him to receive and grasp divine truths when he happens to come upon them through those who know. Study of revealed truths. The more fruitful mode of general meditation consists in studying the revealed truths concerning life and the universe. This mode of understanding and assimilating the divine truths can start by hearing or reading expositions of the divine truth, which have their source in the masters of wisdom. The discourses or the writings of the avatar and the perfect master, whether living or of the past, are suitable objects for this mode of general meditation, because the assimilation of divine truths revealed through them enables the aspirant to bring his life into line with God's purpose in the universe. Value of hearing. Just 1 second as I put everybody else on mute.
Beautiful last paragraph, Karthik.
Indeed.
Yeah, you can highlight it. It's like a mission statement for the group.
Yes, the discourses or the writings of the avatar and the perfect masters, whether living or of the past, are suitable objects for this mode of general meditation, because the assimilation of divine truths revealed through them enables the aspirant to bring his life into line with God's purpose in the universe. I mean, succinctly put, and I couldn't agree with you more.
Yes, Jai Baba, this is our mission statement of this group.
Yes. Well said.
Jai Baba.
Value of hearing. I'll just do the 1 second muting of everybody. Please feel free to unmute if you want to talk. Yeah. Value of hearing. The divine truths are most easily grasped and assimilated when they are passed on directly to the aspirant by a living master. Such personal communications of the master have a power and efficacy that can never belong to information received by the aspirant through other sources. The word becomes alive and potent because of the life and personality of the master. Hence, many scriptures emphasize the need for hearing the divine truths directly through the spoken word of a master. The mode of general meditation that depends upon hearing expositions of the divine truths is undoubtedly the best when the aspirant has an opportunity to contact a living master and listen to him. Advantage of reading. It is not always possible, however, for the aspirant to contact and listen to a living master. In such cases, meditation through reading has some advantages of its own. For the generality of aspirants, meditation through reading has hardly any suitable substitute, because it starts from written expositions which are available at any convenient time. Meditation that starts from reading about revealed truths has the special advantage of being easily accessible to most aspirants. Section B, reading as meditation. Meditation, in that the subtitle is Handicaps of Reading. This section is called Reading as Meditation. So now I go to handicaps of reading. Meditation through reading has its handicaps because most written expositions of the divine truths are meant for intellectual study rather than for assimilation through meditation. The difficulties aspirants experience in this connection are due either to the fact that the method of meditation is not adapted to the subject matter, or to some flaw in the method which makes it mechanical and uninspiring, or to the unwieldiness or vagueness of the subject matter used for meditation. Difficulties removed by specific meditation through reading. All these causes which vitiate meditation and make it unsuccessful have been avoided in the specific meditation recommended in this part. It is intended not only to explain the manner of carrying on meditation through reading, but also to provide an exposition of divine truths in order to fulfill the requirements of this form of meditation. The usual difficulties existing in meditation through reading have been removed in this specific meditation. By ensuring that the process of meditation and the subject matter are adapted to each other and to the conditions of intelligent meditation, by elaborating the different phases of the meditation that starts from reading, and by providing a specially prepared brief exposition of the divine truths that is suitable and valuable subject matter for meditation through reading. The form of meditation that starts from reading about the divine truth has 3 stages. The 3 stages of meditation through reading. Number 1. In the first stage, the aspirant will have to read the exposition daily and simultaneously think about it thoroughly. In the second stage, actual reading becomes unnecessary, but the subject matter of the exposition is mentally revived and thought over constantly. In the third stage, it is quite unnecessary for the mind to revive the words in the exposition separately and consecutively, and all discursive thinking about the subject matter comes to an end. At this stage of meditation, the mind is no longer occupied with any train of thought, but has a clear, spontaneous, and intuitive perception of the sublime truths expressed in the exposition. Since intelligent meditation consists in thorough thinking about a particular subject, it follows that the best help for meditation would be a brief and clear exposition of the subject of meditation. The title is Subject for Meditation. The following concise exposition of the divine truths comprises the whole story of creation, as well as a complete account of the spiritual path and the goal of self-realization. The aspirant can intelligently read the exposition and assimilate the sublime truths it embodies. Brief exposition for meditation through reading. The special form of meditation is extremely easy and useful because reading the subject matter and thinking about it have to be done simultaneously. Further, by making the exposition of the subject clear and concise, the probability of any disturbance arising out of extremely difficult to I'll have to read that line again. Further, by making the exposition of the subject clear and concise, the probability of any disturbance arising out of irrelevant thoughts is eliminated. It is extremely difficult to avoid the disturbance of irrelevant thoughts while meditating upon some lengthy essay or book, even if it is committed to memory. Spontaneous meditation about it therefore becomes impracticable. The appearance of irrelevant thoughts becomes very probable in lengthy meditation on abstract ideas or on some concrete object of experience. But irrelevant thoughts are extremely improbable if the subject matter used for meditation consists of a brief exposition of the supersensible truth. If the aspirant meditates upon the following exposition of the divine truths in the manner that has been indicated above, meditating will become not only spontaneous and easy, delightful and inspiring, but also helpful and successful. The aspirant will thus be taking a very important step toward the realization of the goal of life. Section C, the divine truths for meditation through reading. So this is the section of the divine truths that we have to, this is the exposition part, right? The journey of the soul to the oversoul. The subtitle is Soul and its Illusion. Atma, or the soul, is in reality identical with Paramatma, or the oversoul, which is one, infinite and eternal. The soul is in fact beyond the gross, subtle and mental worlds. but it experiences itself as being limited owing to its identification with the Sharira, Sthula Sharira or gross body, the Prana, Sukshma Sharira or subtle body, which is the vehicle of desires and vital forces, and the Manas, Karana Sharira or mental body, which is the seat of the mind. The soul in its transcendental state is one, formless, eternal, and infinite, and yet identifies itself with the phenomenal world of forms, which are many and finite and destructible. This is Maya or cosmic illusion. States of the phenomenal world. The phenomenal world of finite objects is utterly illusory and false. It has three states: the gross, the subtle, and the mental. Although all these three of these states of the world are false, they represent different degrees of falseness. Thus, the gross world is farthest from the truth, that is God. The subtle world is nearer the truth, and the mental world is nearest to the truth. All three states of the world owe their existence to cosmic illusion, which the soul has to transcend before it realizes the truth. Purpose of creation. The sole purpose of creation is for the soul to enjoy the infinite state of the oversoul consciously. Although the soul eternally exists in and with the oversoul in an inviolable unity, it cannot be conscious of this unity independently of creation, which is within the limitations of time. It's a brilliant line. Although the soul eternally exists in and with the oversoul in an inviolable unity, it cannot be conscious of this unity independently of creation, which is within the limitations of time. It must therefore evolve consciousness before it can realize its true status and nature as being identical with the infinite oversoul, which is one without a second. The evolution of consciousness requires the duality of subject and object, the center of consciousness and the environment, that is the world of forms. Cause of cosmic illusion. How does the soul get caught up in illusion? How did the formless, infinite, and eternal soul come to experience itself as having form and as being finite and destructible? How did Purusha, or the Supreme Spirit, come to think of itself as Prakriti, or the world of nature? In other words, what is the cause of the cosmic illusion in which the individualized soul finds itself? To realize the true status of the oversoul, which is one, indivisible, real, and infinite, the soul needs consciousness. The soul does get consciousness. However, this consciousness is not of God, but of the universe, not of the oversoul, but of its shadow, not of the one, but of many, not of the finite, but of the finite, not of the infinite, but of the finite, not of the eternal, but of the transitory. Thus, the soul, instead of realizing the oversoul, gets involved in cosmic illusion, and hence, though really infinite, it comes to experience itself as finite. In other words, when the soul develops consciousness, it does not become conscious of its own true nature, but of the phenomenal world, which is its own shadow. In order to become conscious of the phenomenal world, the soul must assume some form as its medium for experiencing the world, and the degree and kind of consciousness are determined by the nature of the form used as the medium. The title of this section is Evolution and Degrees of Consciousness. The soul first becomes conscious of the gross world through a gross form. The consciousness of the gross world that it has in the beginning is of the most partial and rudimentary type. Correspondingly, the soul assumes the most undeveloped form, that of stone. There is a footnote. For earlier identification of the soul with gaseous forms, see God Speaks. Okay. Driving force of evolution. The driving force of evolution consists in the momentum consciousness receives owing to the conservation of the impressions left, that is samskaras, left by diverse desires or conditions. Thus, the samskaras cultivated in a particular form have to be worked out and fulfilled through the medium of a higher form and a correspondingly more developed consciousness of the gross world. The soul, therefore, has to assume higher and higher forms like metal, vegetable, worm, fish, bird, and animal, until, as last, it assumes a human form in which it has fully developed consciousness in all aspects of knowing, feeling, and willing of the gross world. The manner in which samskaras result in the evolution of consciousness and the corresponding forms has a useful analog in ordinary experience. If a man has the desire to act the part of a king on the stage, he can only experience it by actually putting on the garb of a king and going on the stage. This is true of aspirations and desires. They can only be worked out and fulfilled by bringing about an actual change in the entire situation as well as the medium through which the situation may be adequately experienced. The parallel is very helpful in understanding the driving force of evolution, which is not mechanical but purposive. Identification with forms. The samskaras are not only responsible for the evolution of the form, that's the body, and the kind of consciousness connected with it, but they are also responsible for the riveting of consciousness to the phenomenal world. They make emancipation of consciousness, that is, the withdrawal of consciousness from the phenomenal world to the soul itself, impossible at the subhuman stage and difficult at the human level. Since consciousness clings to the previous samskaras and experience of the phenomenal world is conditioned by the use of an adequate form, which is body, as a medium, the soul at every stage of evolution comes to identify itself with the form. Thus, the soul, which in reality is infinite and formless, experiences itself as finite and thinks of itself as being stone, metal, vegetable, worm, fish, bird, or animal according to the degree of development of consciousness. Finally, while experiencing the gross world through the human form, the soul thinks that it is a human being. Reincarnation and law of karma. The soul has fully developed and complete consciousness in the first human form, and therefore there is no need for any further evolution of the gross form, the body. The evolution of forms thus comes to an end with the attainment of the human form. To experience the sanskaras cultivated in the human form, the soul has to reincarnate again and again in human forms. The innumerable human forms through which the soul has to pass are determined by the law of karma, or the nature of its previous samskaras, whether of virtue or vice, happiness or misery. During these lives, the soul, which is eternal, identifies itself with the gross body, which is destructible. Subtle and mental bodies. While developing full consciousness of the gross world, the soul simultaneously develops the subtle and mental bodies. But as long as its consciousness is confined to the gross world alone, it cannot use these bodies consciously in wakefulness. It becomes conscious of these bodies and the corresponding worlds only when its full consciousness turns inward, that is, toward itself. When the soul is conscious of the subtle world through the subtle body, it identifies itself with the subtle body. And when it is conscious of the mental world through the mental body, it identifies itself with the mental body. Just as it identifies itself with the gross body when it is conscious of the gross world through the gross body. Spiritual path. The homeward journey of the soul consists in freeing itself from the illusion of being identical with its bodies, gross, subtle, and mental. When the attention of the soul turns towards self-knowledge and self-realization, there is a gradual loosening and disappearance of the sanskaras that keep consciousness turned toward the phenomenal world. Disappearance of the sanskaras proceeds side by side with piercing through the veil of cosmic illusion, and the soul not only begins to transcend the different states of the phenomenal world, but also to know itself as different from its bodies. The spiritual path begins when the soul tries to find itself and turns its full consciousness towards truth. At the first stage, the soul becomes totally unconscious of its gross body and of the gross world, and experiences the subtle world through the medium of its subtle body, with which it identifies itself. In the second stage, the soul is totally unconscious of its gross and subtle bodies, and also of the gross and subtle worlds, and experiences the mental world through the medium of its mental body, with which it now identifies itself. At this stage, the soul may be said to be face to face with God or the Oversoul, which it recognizes as infinite. But though it recognizes the infinity of the Oversoul, which it objectifies, it looks upon itself as being finite because of its identification with the mental body or mind. Thus, we have the paradox that the soul, which in reality is infinite, sees its infinite state, but still continues to regard itself as finite, because while seeing its infinite state, it looks upon itself as the mind. It imagines itself to be the mind and looks upon the Oversoul as the object of the mind. Further, it not only longs to be one with the objectified Oversoul, but also tries hard to fulfill that longing. In the third stage, the full consciousness of the soul is drawn still further inward toward itself, and it ceases to identify itself even with the mental body. Thus, in the third and last stage, which is the goal, the soul ceases to identify itself with any of the three bodies that it had to develop for evolving full consciousness. Now, it not only knows itself to be formless and beyond all the bodies and worlds, but also realizes with full consciousness its own unity with the Oversoul, which is one, indivisible, real, and infinite. In this realization of the truth, it enjoys infinite bliss, peace, power, and knowledge, which are characteristics of the Oversoul. In the beginning, because the soul has not yet evolved full consciousness, it is unconscious of its identity with the Oversoul. Hence, though intrinsically inseparable from the Oversoul, the soul cannot realize its own identity with it or experience infinite peace, bliss, power, and knowledge. Even after the evolution of full consciousness, it cannot realize the state of the Oversoul, although it is at all times in and with the Oversoul, because its consciousness is confined to the phenomenal world owing to the samskaras connected with the evolution of consciousness. So, summary of soul's journey to Oversoul is the subtitle here. Even on the path, the soul is not conscious of itself, but is conscious only of the gross, subtle, and the mental worlds, which are its own illusory shadows. At the end of the path, however, the soul frees itself from all samskaras and desires connected with the gross, subtle, and mental worlds. It then becomes possible for it to free itself from the illusion of being finite, which came into existence owing to its identification with the gross, subtle, and mental bodies. At this stage, the soul completely transcends the phenomenal world and becomes self-conscious and self-realized. To attain this goal, the soul must retain its full consciousness and at the same time know itself to be different from the sharir, the pran. Sharir is gross body, pran is subtle body, which is the vehicle of desire and vital forces, and the manas, mental body, which is the seat of the mind, and also know itself as being beyond the gross, subtle, and mental worlds. The soul has to emancipate itself gradually from the illusion of being finite by liberating itself from the bondage of samskaras and knowing itself to be different from its bodies, gross, subtle, and mental. It thus annihilates the false ego, that is the illusion that I am the gross body, or I am the subtle body, or I am the mental body. which the soul thus frees itself from its illusion, it still retains full consciousness, which now results in self-knowledge and realization of the truth. Escaping through the cosmic illusion and realizing with full consciousness its identity with the infinite oversoul is the goal of the long journey of the soul. Wow. I think this is a very nice Easter egg. I was expecting something on meditation and techniques of meditation and the exposition to be a brief text or a few lines, but this is mind-blowing, as you might have all experienced, because this is the most precise way of covering all that we intend to do in our lives in this human life, right? And it's just fantastic. With that, I open up for questions and comments.
About God speaks in brief.
Absolutely.
And also, I would like to go back to the page the 221 on the book. 3 stages of meditation through reading.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing is given in God Speaks also. Just before the divine theme, Baba talked about the same points there also.
Okay.
About divine theme.
Sure. So I think the only other point I thought I should bring out is there is a lot of value of presence of a master, and we have that presence as Baba has told us even after dropping the body. And I think that presence we have to capitalize, we have to use and further our progress. And I think the value of hearing, which is mentioned by Baba, is again mentioned by all schools of thought, especially the Eastern ones. In fact, the Vedas have another name. It's called Shruti. So just out of hearing came everything, right? So, and there is a lot of importance given to oral proponents and oral, exposition of the truth. So, yeah, I think this was a fantastic chapter. Any other comments? Questions?
Regarding what you said, an extension of that is when you are hearing the physical sound hearing, beyond that there is a sort of a transfer of vibrations between the master and the disciple. This is in the subtle way or the mental sphere. That's why master's presence is a must to understand things very clearly.
Absolutely. Thank you, Baba, for being with us in this group and this journey. Kama, any comments from your side? You're not there? I don't know. Oh, he's there.
He's there, huh?
Yeah.
Muted.
Okay. So we will just continue with, go on to part 5 if there are no more questions.
I think once in a while you can read God Speaks in total, but daily you can read this chapter.
Exactly what I was thinking. So exactly what I was thinking. So that's what he means by the meditation, right? So
yes.
And this exposition is so powerful, so brief, and it's a good reminder for us to read this.
Especially section C, especially.
Yeah, just section C. Just section C. Yeah, over and over again.
I mean, so does it mean section C, what is written, is the topic of meditation, right? So on these points, one must meditate, or what does it?
Yes, that's what he says. So if you, you say just before section C, So he says, you can meditate over an exposition, and then he goes on to explain section C, which is nothing but the divine truth.
Yeah.
So this is the brief exposition for meditation through reading.
Yeah.
No, just one comment is never before in any avataric period this details were ever given. Nowhere in the either Vedas or any Upanishads or any of the scriptures you will find this divine theme, this God speaks theme. That is the special about it.
Yes, absolutely.
That's correct. On a lighter note, we still get confused, Baba having taking pains of, and we have very diverse views sometimes. Yeah. Beautiful.
Yes.
Jai Baba. Yeah.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
So we continue then. If there are no more comments, I go on to part 5, Physical Book 228, Specialized Meditations that are Personal. Kinds of specialized meditation. It was seen in part 3 that specialized meditation is of 3 kinds. Meditation concerned with the objects of experience, meditation concerned with the subject of experience, and the meditation concerned with mental operations. These 3 kinds of meditation are mostly intertwined with each other. The subject of experience, the objects of experience, and the different mental operations that arise as a result of their interaction are all inextricably interwoven. So these 3 kinds of meditation are not sharply defined or exclusive, but often overlap each other. Thus, meditation concerned with the objects of experience may often refer to the subject of experience and also to the diverse mental operations involved in it. Meditation concerned with the subject of experience may often involve reference to the diverse mental operations and the objects to which these mental operations are directed. And meditation concerned with the diverse mental operations may often involve reference to both the subject and the objects of experience. Yet, each kind of meditation, in a way, remains distinct because of some predominating factor. Hence, the first kind of meditation remains predominantly concerned with the objects of experience, the second kind with the subject of experience, and the third kind with diverse mental operations. There's another table. It's the table of enumerative classification of the forms of specialized meditation. So in that, there are A and B. In A, you have meditation concerned with the objects of experience. Because of the overlap that was described, there's also another type of classification, which is forms of personal and forms of impersonal, and they are overlapping between A and B. B is meditation concerned with the subject of experience, and meditation concerned with mental operations is the third section, but it's not clear if it is C or part of B. Okay. Anyway, the 12 meditation types are meditation on the divine qualities of a master, concentration on the form of a master, meditation of the heart, and meditation of action, grouped as forms of personal meditation. Meditation regarding the numerous forms of manifested life, meditating regarding one's own body, meditation on the formless and infinite aspect of God are again still concerned with personal meditation. Are concerned with impersonal meditation, but concerned with an object of experience. Quest for agent of action, considering oneself as witness, are meditation concerned with the subject of experience. So the observer witness, the POW of Kama, and the quest for the agent of action. So action is basically the doership that we have heard. So we think or meditate on the concept of doership, right? And then we go down to writing down thoughts, which is grouped under meditation concerned with mental operations. Writing down thoughts, watching mental operations, and making the mind blank. So from 5 through 12, it's forms of impersonal meditation. Any thoughts, questions here before we go ahead?
You know, this meditation on formless and infinite aspect of God, Baba said love is the most important for anybody to progress spiritually. Can somebody following this method, like Islamic people, they follow Allah, how convenient is that for them without a form, meditating on the formless and infinite? What would be their progress? That's what I was just wondering.
Well, it's a matter of an expert from that path who can tell us. So I'm not aware of it unless somebody wants to respond and give some views on that. But obviously, everybody is making progress, right? So the religion makes far less progress than spirituality. I mean, from a spiritual progress standpoint. So, but formless is obviously more sophisticated and evolved than using the form, right? Because you can get lost in the form. And if you're able to put in practice meditating and focusing on the formless, you are already better off than needing the form, right? That's all I would like to say.
See, even though we are loving Baba, we love the Baba physical form, but we also know that he is God, infinite self, that he is existing everywhere. Whereas we cannot pray to some Tom, Dick, and Harry, because whatever is the reason, you know.
Anyway, that's a good point to discuss, but I think let's focus on the meditation that we are reading. So we'll stop that there. But that's a good thing to reflect upon, right? Any other inputs from anybody else on the meditation and the types? Yeah, go ahead.
This needs a lot more effort to understand. It's not making it very clear immediately as we see the chart and read the lines there. It needs a lot of effort, lot of meditation on this chart itself.
Yeah, especially I am still struggling with the three columns, right? So the A, B, and then the three types on the left, which is second column, and the fifth column, which has personal and impersonal. So I don't disagree with you, but I'm hoping it's clarified further, or we'll have to do some more thinking and discuss back tomorrow.
Anyone who has gone through this and has some better ideas may come in and help us.
Am I audible? Jai Baba, I've gone almost through all of these types. And as you progress in meditation, you know, I switch between this or the other. Sometimes Baba is in his form. Sometimes he's a flower. Sometimes he's color. Sometimes he's my breath. And I write down thoughts as well, following my meditation. And that's also very therapeutic and very freeing. And I've also done considering myself as a witness, which means I observe my body from a distance, concentrating on my my breath, and then your being just dissolves, and you witness yourself from a distance. And so, as a meditator, I would say all of them. You don't really need to. It's not difficult. Once you set out on this path, they just come to you, you know. And you could meditate on your body, you know. So you breathe in and let the breath, you know, you run it through from your toe right up to the top of your head, and do it several times along with breath in, breath, stop for a while, then out breath. And after a while, you'll see that your muscles loosen up a bit, and your brain becomes freer. You don't really struggle with the thoughts anymore because you're very much um, at ease with yourself. And I don't meditate to gain anything. I just meditate to be. So, meditation in all these various forms helps you to cleanse yourself and to be in the now. And yeah, it's just like a vacuum cleaner. And all these forms together, it's not necessarily that you should have a form, you know. For example, you could do Buddhist meditation. There are all types of, you start with Om or you do pranayama. A combination of all these is something that I practice, and each of them have a special value. And by the end of it, it does leave you happier. So I wouldn't used to it. You can sit for hours. You wouldn't even know. If you have the time, I will share an anecdote. I was in Cambodia for a conference, and I suffer from sciatica pain, and my muscles completely spasm, and I had a event to run the next morning. So I made the staff who was with me run a meditation video through YouTube, and I played it for a couple of hours. And in no time, I was back to my normal self. All the ifs and buts had settled down. I was able to perform, and I was much at ease and with myself. So meditation also helps me sometimes with my bodily ailments or disease or those kind of things. Yeah, so all in all, meditation is a very calming tool which does help one in the journey of spirituality. It has helped me tremendously, and I meditate. When I'm singing to Baba, it's also meditation. When I listen to you reading books, is also meditation. When I sit in the corner, is also meditation. If I sit in the garden, is also meditation. So basically, I am completely cuckoo. So have a good day.
Okay.
That was beautiful.
Yeah.
Just as a aside, you gave an example of vacuum cleaner. It is a cleaner to vacuum,
Yes.
to reach vacuum, clean everything to reach vacuum.
Yes. Ah, yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jai Baba.
So we know what we don't know about in the meditation, and then with that we'll continue. So table of enumerative classification. So as I said, we jumped the gun. He's explaining it below. These three kinds of meditation can each be further subdivided into numerous specific forms of meditation. And everybody go back on mute. Let me do it. These three kinds of meditation can each be further subdivided into numerous specific forms of meditation according to the content of the meditation and the manner in which it is conducted. Out of these numerous forms of specialized meditation, only those that are representative or important need particular mention. Thus, 12 forms of specialized meditation are given in the table of enumerative classification. Personal and impersonal meditation. It should be noted that of these 12 forms of specialized meditation, the first four are forms of personal meditation, and the remaining 8 are forms of impersonal meditation. Meditation is personal when it is concerned with a person, and meditation is impersonal when it is concerned with aspects of human personality or something that falls outside the range of human personality as it is usually understood. The forms of specialized meditation are personal, will be explained individually in this part, and the forms of specialized meditation that are impersonal will be explained individually in part 6. Special advantages of personal meditation. Personal meditation has some clear advantages. One second. Yeah, personal meditation has some clear advantages over impersonal meditation. For beginners, personal meditation is easy and attended with joy, while impersonal meditation is often found dry and difficult unless one has a special aptitude for it. Moreover, forms of impersonal meditation are mostly disciplines for the mind or the intellect, whereas the forms of personal meditation are not only disciplines for the mind or the intellect, but also draw out the heart. In spiritual perfection, the mind and the heart have to be fully developed in balance. Therefore, personal meditation, which helps the development and balancing of the mind and the heart, has special importance. Impersonal meditation is especially fruitful and effective when the aspirant has been duly prepared through forms of personal meditation. Personal meditation is directed toward those who are spiritually perfect. Just as a man who admires the character of Napoleon and constantly thinks about him has a tendency to become like him, an aspirant who admires one who is spiritually perfect and constantly thinks about him has a tendency to become spiritually perfect. A suitable object for personal meditation is living or past perfect master or the avatar. Meditation on the spiritually perfect is the title. It is important that the object of meditation be spiritually perfect. If the person selected for meditation happens to be spiritually imperfect, there is every chance of his frailties percolating into the mind of the aspirant who meditates upon him. If the person selected for meditation is spiritually perfect, however, the aspirant has taken to a safe and sure path. Meditation on divine qualities of master. Personal meditation often begins with the admiration an aspirant feels spontaneously for some divine quality that he sees in a master. By allowing the mind to dwell upon the divine qualities expressed in the life of the master, the aspirant imbibes them into his own being. Ultimately, the master is beyond all qualities, good and bad. He is not bound by them. The qualities he exhibits while interacting with life around him are all different aspects of divinity in action, and the expression of divinity through these qualities becomes a medium for helping those who are appreciatively responsive to them. Appreciation of the divinity perceived in the master.
I think the last sentence needs to be highlighted.
The qualities he exhibits while interacting with life around him are all different aspects of divinity in action, and the expression of the divinity through these qualities becomes a medium for helping those who are appreciatively responsive to them. Okay, that's a good.
That is the part of meditation on the person, or the qualities of the person.
Correct. Appreciation of the divinity perceived in the master gives rise to forms of meditation in which the aspirant constantly and strenuously thinks of the master as being an embodiment of qualities like universal love or complete detachment, egolessness or steadfastness, infinite knowledge or selfless action. Sometimes the mind may dwell upon such separate qualities or may dwell upon combined qualities that reveal their interrelatedness. This form of meditation is very valuable when it is spontaneous. It then leads to a greater understanding of the master and gradually remolds the aspirant into a likeness of the master, thus contributing toward his self-preparation for the realization of the truth. Concentration on the form of the master. Dwelling upon the qualities of the master often facilitates concentration on the form of the master. In this type of meditation, the aspirant is aware of the spiritual perfection of the master and he spontaneously fixes his attention upon the form of the master without analyzing his spiritual perfection into any of his component qualities. However, though these qualities are not separately revived in the mind, all that the aspirant may have understood of them through the preparatory meditation concerned with the diverse qualities of the master constitutes the implicit background of such one-pointed concentration and contributes towards its efficacy and value. This form of meditation involves complete identification of the master with the spiritual ideal. Meditation of the heart. Complete identification of the master with the spiritual ideal is responsible for removing such barriers as might exist between the aspirant and the master. This gives rise to the release of unrestrained love for the master and leads to the meditation of the heart, which consists in a constant thinking about the master with an uninterrupted flow of limitless love. Such love annihilates the illusion of separateness which seems to divide the aspirant from the master. And it has in it a spontaneity that is virtually without parallel in other forms of meditation. In its final stages, meditation of the heart is accompanied by unbounded joy and utter forgetfulness of self. Modes of meditation of action. Love for the master leads to increasing identification with the master so that the aspirant desires to live in and for the master and not for his own narrow self. This leads to the meditation of action. The initial modes of the meditation of action usually take the following forms. The aspirant mentally offers the master all that is in him, thus renouncing all that is good or evil in him. This frees him from the good as well as the bad ingredients of the ego and helps him not only in transcending these opposites but also in finding a lasting and true integration with the master. The aspirant volunteers himself in the service of the master or his cause. Doing work for the master in the spirit of selfless service is as good as meditation. The aspirant does not allow the ego to feed upon any of his actions, small or great, good or bad. He does not think, I do this, but on the contrary, systematically develops the thought that through him the master is really doing all that he does. For example, when he looks, he thinks the master is looking. When he eats, he thinks the master is eating. When he sleeps, he thinks the master is sleeping. When he drives a car, he thinks the master is driving the car. Even when he may happen to do something wrong, he thinks the master is doing this. Thus, he completely relinquishes all the agency for his actions, and all that is done by him is brought into direct reference to the master. This automatically and necessarily involves and entails determination of each action in the light of the spiritual ideal as seen in the master. Okay, so I will stop here. It's almost the end. So let's finish this one. But we'll go back to the table tomorrow morning. The 4 forms of personal meditation on the master represent 4 main ascending stages. Perceiving the spiritual ideal in the master, concentrating upon the master as an embodiment of the spiritual ideal, loving the master as a manifestation of the spiritual ideal, and 4, expressing the spiritual ideal perceived in the master in one's own life. Personal meditation on the master in its different forms ultimately contributes towards the release of the creative life of spiritual fulfillment. Meditation on the master is a meditation on the living ideal and not on the bare conception of perfection. Therefore, it generates that dynamic power that eventually enables the aspirant to bridge the gulf between theory and practice and unify the spiritual ideal with everyday activity in his own life. To live a life inspired and illumined by the spiritual ideal, as embodied in the master, is the culmination of all forms of personal meditation. With that, we come to the close of today's class. Tar Meher Baba Ki Jai. I have, as promised, thank you all for responding to my call for personal responses. I think I have gone through all the responses and also applied my mind led by Baba and put my response to all of it. And I think let us focus very, very objectively on what we can do in our individual capacities, led by Baba, and learn more and more and advance the stream of consciousness. With that, I wish you all a great day and look forward to seeing all of you tomorrow. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Jai
Jai
Baba.
Baba. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. Jai Baba.